This podcast is brought to you by CDkeyoffer.com. Use offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% on all Microsoft software during their Black Friday sale. And also use offer code BrokenSilicon to save $30 on the Minis Forum V3 3-in-1 tablet. We'll talk about these sponsors more later, but for now, let's just get on with the show. Welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today I am joined in person by my co-host,
Dan.
So we're going to see how the whole mic swivel thing works. I mean, honestly, we've been trying to enjoy the Thanksgiving break as much as we can without working here. We've actually had a solid 2 or 3 days without, or I should speak for myself really, without working, which is very unlike me for the Moore's Law Z YouTube channel. So instead of going into 2 separate rooms with 2 different recordings, we thought we'd just do, well, we do something really out of the 2019 and 2020 era, I think, where we were like, it's the day after Black Friday. Let's just sit next to a mic here and go through the news together. But I do think it creates a different dynamic. I do think there's a bit more of a back and forth that feels a little more organic in person. And also, it's unmistakable. We get through the notes quicker when we're next to each other, just because I think you play off. I think you talk faster because you're more energetic when you're next to someone in person, don't you think?
Yeah, the one thing I will say about this, we've never tried the mic
swivel
on both of us before, so we'll see how the swivel goes. I guess there won't be any very much crosstalk, which might actually be good, but we'll see.
And as long as the quality stays at a good level, I think this will make it significantly easier for Gerard as well, who's had to edit quite a lot of oddly timed, recorded, rushed episode recently. So I know that guy could use a break as well. But first, let's get to the opening reader mail. Jensen Wang, who insists he's not anti-competitive, writes in and says, would you bet $5,000 that the PlayStation 6 is called the Play AI Station 1 out of 6 or the PlayStation AI or something along those lines? And of course, this is, as often comes from this supporter on Patreon, almost all joke questions. But I do think there's something interesting to discuss here, and it is that, and I think I just discussed this with Colin Moriarty on Sacred Symbols, which I believe this will drop on the same day or within 2 days of Sacred Symbols, plus coming out with me on that as well. So look for that as well if you're a fan of him. But if they should change the name of PlayStation ever, in my opinion is, really, I would argue the PSP didn't. It was just PlayStation Portable. I would even argue the next PlayStation handheld, which we'll get to in the wrap-up, should probably be called the PlayStation Portable 2. Let's stop there. Do you think it should be called something new, like not Vita, but in that vein of like a new thing? Or should it just be called PSP 2? Or I would argue, actually, if it is a PS5 or PS6 effectively, they should just call it PS5S or PS5P, PS5 Portable, PS6 Portable, and just do away with any special naming.
Yeah, I mean, if it's literally just meant to be a portable PS5, I don't know why you would call it anything other than a PS5 Portable. I mean, I would say there would be an argument to be made for PS5 Portable, PS5 Portable, PS Portable 2 or PS Portable 3, and they're just pretending the Vita they also call the PSP. As far as naming goes in general.
What if they called it the PSP3?
Like, I don't know why Sony would ever go away from the PlayStation numbering scheme, because it's worked this long. And, I mean, I think if Sony was going to change it, they would have done it with the PS3, because that's the one that was looked the most like a failure at the time, I guess.
Yeah, and there was a lot of rumors that they might change it after the PS3 because of that, but they didn't. And I think I can't help but go, if you look around, like, I don't really think Xbox One helped Xbox. I think it caused a pain for them to name the next one because they maybe wanted to do 2, or I don't know actually what they wanted to do. And if you look at AMD, RDNA, I mean, it works fine. It doesn't really matter. I mean, people don't really care what the acronym that means nothing is, or, most people don't really worry that much if it's Lovelace or Blackwell. They just know RTX 5000. They know RX 8000 or 7000 series. But it does look really silly in hindsight that AMD called it RDNA just because Elizabeth Holmes was out there, stealing money from people. And so everything had to be called DNA. If AMD changes it to RXAI, which that would be an AMD thing. I don't know that that's really going to age any better. In fact, you could almost argue anytime that AMD names something after the fad, that is when the bubble's at its peak. And I would go as far as to say, no, I don't think Sony should. I think AI maybe and the ability to actually talk to NPCs in a more realistic and really just more effortless way, and being able to generate stuff with AI in games probably will be a differentiating factor next gen. But just call it PS6. We don't need the Xbox AI. We don't need the PlayStation AI. Stick with what makes sense, and I think Sony's one of the few companies that's just done that. I guess Apple also have just iPhone 14. Screw it. We're not going to pretend it's some Apple AI. That will be the name of an IP, but we're not calling it the Apple AI phone. And I think a lot of the brands that do the best don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sony will almost certainly have, if they have a dedicated neural engine in the PS6, which I would guess they will. I mean, they'll probably have PSAI as a advertising thing, but it'll be advertised as a feature, not as the PlayStation AI itself. Although there are two A's in PlayStation, so they could put the Play I Station, Stay I Station. Wait, no, the Play I Stay I Station.
I think putting AI in a name looks a lot better than it sounds when you try to say it. I mean, going on to corrections and omissions, the first one here is from Compressed AI Blocks, one of the only ones I can actually say without stumbling through their name. It says, Tom, I'm not even sure where to post this, but it's a bit more of a discussion on console OS slowing down or issues and generations on BS284. I recently borrowed an Xbox Series X as I primarily game on PC and PS5, so I wanted to borrow an Xbox for my friend to play Gears of War. By the way, I think they're still fantastic, of course, besides 4 and 5, he says. And I noticed the amount of OS slowdowns and bugs in this thing are insane. I've had so many crashes to desktop, for lack of a better term for a console, doing basically what that is. The video has just gone fully black or not returned while doing quick resume. I've had it where the OS just stuttered or froze for multiple seconds while navigating through the OS. And I've had an issue where the Series X would no longer launch games, and after contacting support, they informed me a whole console reset would be needed to fix this. I know this is all anecdotal, but Jesus, it feels like Microsoft isn't even trying to support this console anymore. And keep in mind, though anecdotal, this all happened within about 1 month, easily 8+ straight crashes plus all the other issues. So he definitely does the console user experience the best in my opinion. Well, so number one, to be fair, I don't know if you ever had this bug on PlayStation, did it? I actually haven't seen it for I think a year or two, but at least the first few years the PS5 was out, every now and then there'd be this weird, or was it PS4? It was PS4. It was PS4, I think, where for some reason in the menu, it was just ghosty. And I just have to mess with HDMI, enable HDR, disable HDR, enable 4K, disable 4K, back and forth, and eventually it would fix the issue. And I haven't seen that for a long time, though.
No, I mean, PS5 has been a pretty good experience in general, I would say. Very few bugs. I will say, recently, I'm trying to remember when it was. When I was trying to open a game and for some reason it just went to black, but I think it was a weird crosstalk issue with the smart TV I was using. I'm not going to blame the PS5 for that, but that's the one issue I've had with the PS5 that comes to mind. And I don't know, I just turned the TV on and off and it worked. So it wasn't really a big deal.
Yeah, so I just bring that stuff up to try to be fair. That's not like I haven't seen issues with PlayStations. I will say in the past year, it seems really stable, though.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't have an Xbox Series X. I used one a year ago at a friend's house. And so I actually asked that friend before we started recording. His name's Greg from Chicago. I messaged him and I said, have you seen any issues? And he said, actually, yes, I have noticed far more bugs lately. I just assumed it was the more recent games, though. But if other people are reporting that, he's like, I can say I've seen a lot more bugginess lately and crashes and stuff. Although he wasn't sure he's noticed the OS slowdown. So I just thought that was an interesting one because, again, anecdotal, but when I reached out to someone, they've seen more bugginess. But I really would say I just hope people in the comments can tell us because I don't know. Is this a thing that people are seeing on Xbox right now? I really do not know. And I'm actually really curious what you guys say. All right, moving on to another correction here. We have one from Techno, who says, you said that stock is there for the 9800X3D, but at least in Amazon UK, it sold out, and when I checked, was in 37th place. We had many CPUs, including awful pre-builts that were somehow counted as just a CPU on Amazon. Yeah, sometimes they count just CPU brackets as well, or thermal paste. Being behind the 4600G, 14600K, 2700K, he lists a bunch of CPUs. Basically, every Zen 3 CPU bar the 5800X3D, and all Zen 4 non-APUs barred the 7950X. Well, so here's one thing I would say. I just checked it. I don't know when you checked. It wasn't even in the top 50. And so that would, to me, suggest it was somewhere above 37 when it came out. I don't know where, but I would suggest it was, I think I checked it and it was above 37, and now it's below it because it's probably just sold out. So checking Amazon bestsellers weeks after a launch sometimes is tricky because almost everything eventually falls down. It's actually crazy. Like when the 7900 XTX was out, it actually stayed in the top 5 for a Radeon card for weeks. I remember that happening. And on top of that, though, Carbon Cry, who of course helps prepare the notes, noted that Amazon isn't Amazon in Europe, guys. Like, Amazon is the thing in the US, and I don't know how big it is relatively speaking in Europe, but like Overclockers UK is the one I hear anyone in England mention for buying PC parts. So when I went and I actually checked a couple of websites there, it's one of them said 12 had sold today, and it was in the top 10 sellers. So my understanding is that in specifically the UK, like more local, you might say, online shops are preferred for stock over Amazon. That's often true in the US as well, where despite, I would definitely say, the US Amazon store getting more, even relatively speaking, more 9800X3Ds than Amazon in the UK, that clearly Micro Center was the place to go to get the 9800X3D. There are like dozens or hundreds in stock at every location I checked for days, despite them saying it's their top seller. So I just think you've got to remember that, like, there's ways you can look at Amazon and try to use it to prove a point, but trying to actually quantify something, especially in Amazon's outside the US, has its limits. If you want to know what's selling the best, you should also, in the US, be looking at Micro Center. If you're in the UK, you should be looking at Overclockers UK. You shouldn't be looking probably at Amazon. And on top of that, I would also say, but yeah, I mean, I've said, I think most of the supply is going to the US. That's how it usually goes with a tech launch. Especially lately, UK usually gets stock last. And then on top of that, I just keep hearing that companies are rushing stuff into the US because of worries about tariffs next year. So, yeah, it's happening. I don't know. Do you want to say anything else?
Oh, and I was just going to say, like, we don't know what it's like in the US, and perhaps whoever's writing in doesn't know. I mean, in the UK, and perhaps whoever's writing in doesn't quite know how huge Amazon is in the US. Like, I don't know if they just don't get that. Like, we talk about Micro Center all the time because they're a great in-person retailer, but they're relatively small comparatively because they're only in like 30 locations in the US to my memory. Amazon really is the thing. There's also Newegg, but Amazon is the thing people order online with in the US.
So at least this is what popped up. The relatively speaking, I'm seeing here, Amazon Seller Central USA, $396 billion was done across different Amazon marketplaces in the US. Comparatively, in the same time period, Germany was 38, UK was 34. I don't know relative economy size, but at least population wise, isn't the UK like 60, 80 million or something?
Yeah, it's not 10 times smaller.
No. So that should give you some perspective, is that it's more than 10 times smaller, Amazon in the UK is than the Amazon US. And I don't know what it should be, but it should probably be more like a sixth or something. I don't know. And again, don't take that number as me being sure that's what it is. And so again, that should just give you some perspective. I wouldn't go to, like, we use Mind Factory in a lot of mainland Europe. We use Overclockers UK in the UK for a reason instead of Amazon. But I did appreciate that question because I'm sure that's something a lot of people worried about or wondered about. All right, let us now then move on to a rather large mashup story here with story number 1. Moore's Law is dead, and Intel, and actually AIBs for Nvidia, confirm next-gen GPU launch timeframes. All right, so we're just going to go through just a myriad of confirmations, both from the Moore's Law is dead leak and also from other sources and websites out there on when all of these next-gen GPUs are coming out. And first, we'll start with Battlemage. So it should be the first to launch, doing so in November with a classic ARC launch. That is to say, don't expect a lot of availability. This is a checkbox for investors, so Intel can say they've released Battlemage on time and on the roadmap. This is what it said, 2023 to 2024. And by that, I guess they mean at the last few weeks of 2024. And for anyone doubting that this is going to happen, a Battlemage launch in December, Gunner, which, by the way, is one of the AIBs that I leaked would be one of the only ones supporting Battlemage, just said that they're going to unveil new Battlemage cards on December 4th. And so this is completely confirmed. I believe Intel's also said December 3rd or something in the US. Next week, we're going to have Battlemage be revealed. A week after that, we should have the launch. And that launch will be the B580 at least, which uses the G21 die, is expected to outperform the A770, according to the people I talked to, by 5 to 15%, with worse efficiency than a 4060. Basically, that makes it a 7600 XT, but instead of having 16 gigabytes, it has 12 gigabytes, and it uses the 4 nanometer node to match a 6 nanometer product, basically, from AMD. That just tells you how far behind Intel is in GPU design. Then there's the G31 die. This is the mid-range one. So there's G10 was high-end. G31 was mid-range. Although, again, mid-range supposed to come out a year ago. So by now, I would argue it's lower mid-range. Yeah, and then G21's definitely low-end if we're competing with 6 nanometer products from a year ago from AMD. But what I leaked also is that G31, this mid-range die that could be around a 4070 in performance, this is what they would probably call the B770. It hasn't even taped out yet, and it's very unclear if it ever will. So I'm sorry, this is exactly what I leaked with ARC effectively canceled. Just a drawn out, releasing what they have to say they're not missing things to investors, but not competing in the way that they said they would. They're not competing in ultra enthusiasts. They're not competing with the 5090, let alone the 4090. It's just a drawn out kind of, again, baton death march for ARC is what I call it. And then let's now move on to what's going to happen with Blackwell. So sources that I talked to from in retail and AIB confirmed that the 5090 and 5080 will be announced at CES, with the 5070 also being revealed in January. And also that they are positioning all cards above the 5070 Ti as professional products that aren't really meant for gamers. This is, of course, a document I can't share because it could give away who was specifically briefed, but retailers are being told, like someone at a Micro Center or a Best Buy or something, are being told that if customers ask, why is the 5080 so expensive, that you're supposed to say, well, it's really for professionals. So that's what's going on now. I guess now the 5080 is Titan class, according to Nvidia. And also, this was confirmed, the launch date, that is, by an AIB. I believe it was NO3D on a Brazilian live stream in the past couple weeks. Just said it's going to be announced at CES. So, yes, this is not only leaked by me, I believe other people. It's been rumored forever. It's happening. Blackwell is going to be announced at CES and launched through January and February. And then, finally, the plucky underdog, RDNA 4. With Intel trying to save the $300 low-end price point and Nvidia focusing on high-end, AMD has chosen a good time, possibly to launch an all mid-range generation. Just like Nvidia, they will announce and launch RDNA 4 at CES, or at least announce it at CES. I believe they will launch one card in January. And I cannot confirm yet if FSR 4 will be ready for launch. It kind of sounds like maybe a beta end of January or something. That's me speculating. No one mentioned end of January. It's just, so there you go. Intel's going to paper launch Battlemage first. We have confirmation all over the place on that. But it's, again, a paper launch. Then Nvidia and AMD are going to rush some products out at CES. So, yeah. Dan, what do you think about all this?
I mean, first off, to me, the Blackwell thing where they're positioning, to me, it sounds like they're almost trying to position the 5070 Ti and 5070 as high-end, which they used to be. But I'm curious what that means, if they're going to, like, really try to go for, like, increasing pricing for the 5070 Ti, or if I'm just misreading what they're saying there. Because I don't know. To me, that sounds like they're trying to really go for it with the 5080 in pricing, and who the hell knows what the 5070 Ti could go for. I don't know. All of this, like, changing in branding to me sounds like it could be turn into something with more what we've called, like, branding shrinkflation. I don't know. I hope I'm wrong about that, but as far as, like, the timing for everything goes, I don't know. I'm really curious for Intel's quote unquote launch. I'm hoping we get real reviews this year, but I really don't know what anything words mean when it comes to Intel at this point.
Yeah, and I spoke to people about Blackwell. Again, this is like maybe 1 or 2 week old information at this point, but I was basically told Battlemage is going to be a lot like Alchemist in that they'll announce it, they'll say it's out, there'll be very limited availability, probably at a few retailers like Newegg, and and because to my memory, Alchemist barely had any stock at Micro Center even at launch or something, and then you'll get like a handful of reviewers have a few cards. Although I guess it depends too what my sources are talking about, because the A380 was the most ridiculous rollout. I mean, technically the 380 launched before the A770, and it was like one person got a hold of it like 2 weeks after launch, and then we finally got reviews. And so I don't know. I think it's going to be something in between that and the A770 launch, where it's like probably Linus will have one, maybe Gamers Nexus and Hardware Unboxed, and a few others, and that's going to be that. And then it'll probably be crazy low volume, but still easy to get because no one wants it. As for Nvidia, though, we're not really, the purview of this episode isn't to go into the performance and specs again. We've done so many episodes on that. But, I mean, you say shrinkflation for Blackwell. Yeah, it really is. I mean, I think the one thing it sounds like they're going to do, I can't completely confirm this myself, but I've seen other rumors stating this, and this is something I've been suspecting would be the case, is the 5070 Ti is probably going to be cut down 5080. So it actually has 16 gigabytes for like $800, or who knows, maybe $900. I actually haven't really heard the price on the Ti. Everything I've heard is that the 70 should probably actually come out before that, and it's GB205, not 04. So it's 192-bit still, it sounds like. Still 12 gigabytes, probably $600. I mean, probably looking at something 15 to 20% faster. Then so I don't know, probably something around. Yeah, I mean, I remember this distinctly. One source told me that they had a briefing where they were directly comparing it to the 4070 Ti, not the Super. So it's probably a hair faster than a 4070 Ti for $600, which when you already get a $600 7900 XT, who cares?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. Blackwell, a lot of shrinkflation, and I don't think they really care. This is an opening for AMD. This is something James Pryor discussed with me in depth, that he agrees that AMD has an opening, and he actually was more bullish on RDNA 4 than I was, which I found interesting, thinking that like, no, they know they have an opening and they might be out for blood this time. That yes, whatever, who knows what their real market share is in actual gamers, removing the people buying stuff for AI, but that they might, if they can even just go from 15 or 20% market share to 25 to 30, 50% increase in market share, so that would be a wild success for them. And we did 100% agree on one thing, that if Nvidia went from like, 80% market share to 75, Jensen probably won't even respond. Like, who cares, AMD? You can have it. If someone's used to eating toast, a chicken dinner can look like a steak dinner, and that's what it might be to AMD, who's not used to 100% margins like Nvidia. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, we've kind of been talking about this for a while. I put out a lot of content about it. I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts on these products coming out? I mean, we're going to have a lot to talk about in the last news episode of the year, I think, or at least enough that it will be a decent episode. And I think early next year, we're going to be very busy.
Oh, yeah. CES is often busy, but this sounds like it'll be an extra busy one. But yeah, I mean, AMD has a really big opening in the low end and mid-tier markets. So I'm glad they're both unveiling at CES, and hopefully AMD figures out how to market at CES of 2025 because they are not good at it.
This piece of content is brought to you by CDkeyoffer.com. Just in the past few weeks, Dan built a new PC with a fresh install of Windows 11 on a blazing fast Gen 5 NVMe SSD. And of course, that code for Windows 11 came from CDkeyoffer.com. And we've been using CDkeyoffer.com at Moore's Law for a very long time. I use it for my office software on both my desktop and my laptop. And that's because they're reliable. They've always been there for us, and they offer reasonable prices for Microsoft products that are usually set, in my opinion, at monopolistic pricing. And you know what? They're actually having a Black Friday sale right now. So if you're looking to get the best pricing on Microsoft software or games or other products on their website as well, please show support for a company that's shown support for the Moore's Law is Dead team and community for years by using offer code BROKENSILICON to get 25% off all Microsoft software and DieShrink to get 3% off everything else. Again, you're supporting the channel even if you just click on the links in the description. But of course, also, if you need these products, getting them through CDkeyoffer.com during their big Black Friday sale, well, that helps the channel even more. So support Moore's Law is Dead by checking out CDkeyoffer.com today. TechnoLads writes in and says, as we know, RDNA 4 will last for about a year, if not less, since it's releasing in January of 2025, and we're expecting RDNA 5 Q4 or Q1 of 26. I wouldn't say we 100% know that. They've pushed back the RDNA 4 launch. I think it's plausible. I haven't actually asked anyone about RDNA 5 for half a year. I mean, so I don't know that we should assume that it will be like 10 months after it. I could believe something like that, but a lot of that's going to depend on how the GPU market goes. And if RDNA 4 is launching early 2025, I don't know why we wouldn't be able to easily foresee RDNA 5 coming out early to mid or late 2026. I mean, it's just going to depend. And that's when NVIDIA would have a new generation anyways, too. So TechnoLads asks, will we expect RDNA 4 to be the low end for a long time? I just think we know the game plan pretty much here. Again, it's something, bringing him up again, this is something James Pryor said he wish would stop, or we could go back to the old days where like the HD 7970 and 7950 came out, and then like a month later or whatever, 7870, 7850, and a month later, 7770, 7750, and we just had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cards ready to go from the start, basically. That was the good old days. I liked when that happened. But I think we know what these companies do now. They launch the top end of the generation. I mean, why do you think AMD stopped production on Navi 31, like I reported, extra early and pushed it to get rid of it? Because they want that completely gone when RDNA 4 launches. And then think about it. I've heard they're launching one card at first. Why? To have the top 8800 XT and then to be able to keep selling the 7800 XT for 150 less. And then the 8700 XT will come out. And then when that's gone, they'll put out Navi 44. Yeah, that's the smaller one. I believe there's 44 is a 40. Yeah, I think 44 is the smaller one. And I think NVIDIA is going to do the same, right? Like they launch the top, wait for things to sell out, launch the next one, launch the next one. I think that's not going to change in the foreseeable future for either of these companies.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why it would become a new Polaris. I guess RDNA 4 will probably exist alongside top-end RDNA 5 for a while, assuming that RDNA 5 actually tries to go for the performance crown again. Like, I mean, that's what I at least think is happening right now. So sure, RDNA 4 will exist for maybe a couple years, but I don't know why it would have the long legs that Polaris managed to have.
My long legs. Yeah, I don't. You knew I was going to do that. Anytime someone says long legs, go, my long legs. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know why they would change that strategy anytime soon. And if anything, I would consider the 7600 XT more likely. Would just keep selling for like $200 or something. Well, 7600 probably for $200 or something. I don't know though. Alex Pixel writes in and says, do you have information on if the next RDNA 4 GPUs will have a virtual link USB-C port? I want to try out a PSVR 2 or another reasonably priced VR headset without adapters. On RDNA 3, only their own reference models from AMD have a virtual link USB-C port. Why do no other models have it? Is the interest from GPU board makers rising or declining regarding virtual link USB-C support? Well, I mean, the board makers make what they think will sell. And I actually did a little bit of digging on this. I asked a couple people, no one really knows, and it was pointed out to me that like it doesn't matter. Like anyone can have a virtual link USB-C port or just decide to make it in a more HDMI or display port based on how they want to use the bandwidth and the IO that's available to them. So it'd be, I guess that is something I could note by now, but I don't really, and that could change. And on top of that, I'd remind everybody that I have leaked that yes, there will be a reference cooler for RDNA 4, but they're not going to sell it from AMD.com. And I don't think it's going to be as prevalent. I think there's going to be far, far, far more AIB custom coolers this time than there were at launch before, and it's going to be much rarer to find a reference card. We'll see. Could be wrong about that, but that is the impression I get, especially because I've been told by some industry veterans that the main reason why AMD would give such a long lead up to the launch of RDNA 4, like telling board makers long before it comes out what the specs are and what they need to do, is so that there isn't this weird time where like they rush out reference boards and then are rushing to make their own custom designs. They have enough time to actually have their custom designs ready near launch that are more cost competitive based on what they can source themselves. They're not just having to buy the cooler from AMD or whatever, or AMD supplier. Because of that, I looked around. Basically, yeah, all add-in boards use no USB-C. So, I mean, I don't know if the reference card will have it, but I don't think it's going to be as prevalent. So I'd be surprised if no one made one with that USB-C virtual link port. But I don't know. The market seems to be saying not that many people are asking for it, unfortunately.
I don't know. At least I think VR is kind of at a point where everybody that wants it has it almost, and it's just not that popular. I don't know.
Alrighty, and speaking of not popular, let us move on to story number 2. Intel Arc B570 allegedly has 10 gigabytes of GDDR6. So yeah, there's been this slide put out. It looks very real to me. I have no reason to doubt it. I guess this is the caveat. I don't have this info myself to give to you today. I'm just reporting on what I believe looks like a true rumor. And it's a whole spec sheet from ASRock on the B570 that it supposedly has 2.6 gigahertz clocks. I believe that's been rumored for a bit now, though. And 10 gigabytes of 19 gigabit per second GDDR6 over a 160-bit bus. It also has DisplayPort 2.1, HDMI 2.1. And I don't have much to say about this, except if you're seeing this, and 4 nanometer yields are very, very, very good. If you're seeing them make a card 10 gigabytes, it's because they want to make it as cheap as possible here. Especially like, and I know there's the RX 6700, but keep in mind the RX 6700 was just the 7600 MXT or whatever it was called, that they were getting rid of the yields no one was buying on laptop. Intel isn't supporting Battlemage on laptop because they know OEMs hate it. So if they're making a 160-bit version that isn't going to be used on laptop, they're just doing whatever they can to remove another $10, right? Probably another $10 to $20 from the cost of this, so that if they have like a $300 B580, that the thing below it can hopefully get to $250 or $200. And I will say it's going to have to be, because the information I have is that the B580, right, 5 to 15% faster than an A770. To me, that's like, okay, what, 5% ahead of the 4060? But it's going to have 12 gigabytes of RAM. That's going to have to be 300 at most. Honestly, you can get 3060 12 gigabytes for 280. I mean, I'd suggest this thing to make a splash. I mean, you're competing with a 12 gigabyte card, the 3060 from 2021. This should cost less to like make a big deal. Like, even if it's like 5, you can't be like, oh, well, we're 5% better than a 3 or almost 4-year-old card. Like, so I think they need to try to get to 250 for the B580 and 200 for the B570. Again, because also the 6700 10 gigabyte is 250 and is probably about the same performance, maybe slightly weaker. I don't know. That's where I'm at when you see 4060 for 285, 3060s for 280, and 6700 10 gigabytes for 250. But yeah, there you go. What do you think of the B570, Dan?
I mean, we briefly touched on it, like the B580 in the last story, and yeah, this is just that, but worse. Like, I think the B580 might be a somewhat fair price at $300, but I mean, the Arc brand is so in the gutter, and just Intel at large's brand is so in the gutter right now. I don't know if people would buy it for more than $250 at any large number. And then the B570, yeah, I don't know. I think they need to try to make this thing $200. I have no expectation that's what it's going to be, but I think that's where it needs to be to actually sell anything.
I completely agree. I mean, again, the 7600 XT is like $320 right now, and it has 16 gigabytes of RAM. So you have a 16 gigabyte, far more established brand competitor in the 7600 XT. Even 300 seems dumb to me. I mean, you got to be 20% cheaper. I mean, frankly, 30, 40% cheaper for, and like, if I think AMD needs a 30% mulligan to be a great seller and at least 15% to do okay relative to Nvidia, then Intel relative to AMD is I mean,
The same?
I mean, 30%. Yeah. And then to Intel, I mean, to Nvidia, like 50%. It needs to be half the price. So I don't know. I mean, there it is. Again, if it was 200 and 250, I think you're looking at products that might be okay for some people. But again, I just sit there and go, yeah, but you're not going to spend the extra $30 for the Nvidia brand, knowing that Nvidia is going to support this card for 10 years with drivers.
That's a good point. I mean, the one thing I will say is hopefully on review day, we see reviews and there aren't the driver issues that Alchemist had, because
I've heard it should be more stable.
Okay, because if it's relatively stable, performs well in DX9 and 11 games and 12 games, and has okay energy efficiency, I don't know, maybe it's a decent buy at 250, but you do have a good point. Like, who the hell knows how long this is going to get driver support for? Intel isn't a company that's doing super great.
No, and again, just to put a final bow on this point we're making here, I'm not an asshole. I'm just looking at I'm trying to make a common sense argument to you all on why at this point it's definitely over for ARC, and it's that Nvidia's R&D is so much higher than what the GPU people at Intel are getting. Mm-hmm. How would you ever expect, everyone's like, well, if they could just keep up in the mid-range. How? They launched a 6 nanometer card that couldn't compete with an 8 nanometer card of the same die size, namely the 3070 Ti versus the A770. And it certainly wasn't competing with AMD's own 7 nanometer cards that were similar die sizes. I mean, the closest comparison would be a 6800, really, because it's heavily cut down. And I mean, the 30% smaller 6700 XT wiped the floor with the A770. And that was 6 versus 7 nanometer and 6 versus 8 nanometer. Now we're getting to a situation here where it sounds like the B580 is competing with a 6 nanometer GPU of a similar die size even though they're using 4 nanometer. That's them falling farther behind in the technology race and what they're able to do with a similar node. What do you think is going to happen when AMD has their 4 nanometer RDNA 4 card next to it that I think is rumored to beat the 4060 Ti? And this is competing to the 4060. I mean, yeah, it's not going to be pretty. Yeah. And now they're getting even less funding. Well, Nvidia is getting even more funding. How do you expect them to catch up? Pretty soon it's probably going to be they need a 2 nanometer card to compete with a 3 nanometer card at best. And so, I don't know. That's something you should worry about if you want to get Blackwell. It's just, it really shouldn't be your lead GPU because in a year or two, driver support may get dropped, or they've proven to this day new AAA releases don't boot. Some games don't boot on Alchemist. And if they're still having trouble with that now after years of development, I don't know why we would, and Lunar Lake as well, I don't know why we would be any more optimistic. But yeah, I don't want to beat a dead horse here. Let us move on to story number 3. NVIDIA basically confirms that they've stopped supplying GPUs before Blackwell's launch, just like this channel leaked a while ago. So NVIDIA CFO Colette Kress on a Q3 earnings call said, Q3 was a great quarter for gaming with notebook, console, and desktop revenue all growing sequentially and year on year. On gaming, although sell-through was strong in Q3, we expect fourth quarter revenue to decline sequentially due to supply constraints. NVIDIA confirmed what we have been saying on this channel for weeks, if not months now. Lovelace Production has stopped. That's the only real interpretation of supply constraints. Kress warned of there's not capacity issues at TSMC, people. It's just production is over. Stocks of the chips are running out. And that is why you see prices not really decreasing on some models right now, specifically the 4090. It's not just because it's in high demand, although it is. They aren't making them. And a lot of them are just going to China where they'll sell for $3,000 to $4,000 on the street. So they are in limited supply, and NVIDIA, and also honestly probably AMD have also leaked, of course, that AMD has stopped production of at least Navi 31, if not also by now I think 32. They're waiting for everything to sell out this holiday season so they don't get stuck with the issues they had with supply in 2022 and before. And well, budget and mid-range GPUs are a very good deal right now for a lot of them. Again, I mean, we're talking $250 6700s, $350 6800s, which I'd just definitely go for the 6800 at that point. Those cards are okay, but I really wouldn't buy anything above the 7900 XT. And even that, I'm starting to notice raising price a little bit. The time to get it was when it was 600. And the second you see that going towards 700, I go, can you not wait 1 month to get the card that's going to be that uses less energy with better ray tracing. That's what my advice would be. But I don't know if you have any thoughts about this. It's kind of just adding on to the other story.
Basically what you said. AMD and Nvidia learned their lesson from Ampere and RDNA 2 very clearly. So I don't think we're going to see those crazy deals we saw for those. I mean, especially RDNA 2, but we're not going to see these just floating around for 2 years at decreased prices, unfortunately. But I don't know. If you can get a 7900 XT for 600 still, go for it.
All right, and now let us move on to story number 4. Strix Halo low power details leaked. Quoting here from my recent video, a source who is an AMD partner. This person said, I was just briefed on another Strix Halo model, and although they probably won't call it this publicly, in the briefing, they refer to it as Halo low power informally a few times, and it has 128-bit bus, 8 Zen 5 cores, 20 CUs of RDNA 3.5, and maybe 16 megabytes of Infinity cache. The 16 megabytes of Infinity cache wasn't in writing. It was like, oh, probably that or something. And so that was not 100%, but I think that's very likely. I mean, you have half the bus, half the amount of compute units. I would suggest that means, I mean, that's how it usually works with all RDNA architectures. The amount of bus you disables that much Infinity cache usually. But then also, the only real difference from the Moore's Law is Dead leak from the episode with the Fox was the TDP at 105 watts. So we had hoped, or the part I had speculated about, because I never saw what the target TDP was, just that it was supposed to beat 3050s easily. I would have assumed if they're going from 120 watts to like something half cut down and with one chiplet instead of 2 for the cores, that would mean 65 watts at most. I don't really know what the point of this would be besides that, but apparently no, it is not aiming to be a low power handheld king. Again, I thought maybe it'd be like, this is the premium edition. Mm-hmm. If you want to pay more than what Strix Point costs for something that's basically Strix Point plus 30% performance in the same form factor, here you go, baby. It's just our worst yields of Halo. No, I don't know. It just seems like it's trying to take on like i7 3050 laptops that are like $1,000 or something. And it is worth noting, though, that yes, the 3050 8 gigabyte on desktop is like, I don't know, right? Like 10-20% weaker than a 2060 or something, but on laptop, 3050s have 4 or 6 gigabytes of RAM. They're really closer to a 1660, even like 1660 Max Q. And because of that, I don't really have any doubt that a 20 compute unit, probably Infinity cache laid in, RDNA 3.5 will crush the 3050. And anyone who goes, well, why does that matter? Nvidia is going to keep using the 3050 for years for like $1,900 laptops. And I guess this is AMD's way. Again, Trojan horse selling a GPU with a CPU there. The only thing I wonder is how many of these yields they'll actually have, but I don't know. They'll probably just start. I know this launches after the 12 and 16 core editions and 40 compute unit models of Strix Halo. So my suspicion will be they'll just keep setting aside the bad yields for like half a year and then launch this or something. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe they'll release a lower TDP model, but at this point, it doesn't seem like that's guaranteed. Doesn't seem like they're going for a 45 to 65 watt or lower version of Strix Halo. So what do you think about this, Dan?
Well, just as something that's a 3050 competitor, I mean, I have a 3050 laptop, the 6 gigabyte version of it. And what I will say is it's a really good entry-level laptop. So if they have or entry-level gaming GPU. So if they can have that in the form of an APU or even slightly beat the 3050, I think this is set as an entry-level gaming laptop GPU for a long time. And this is a really good competitor to any 3050 paired with anything. And if that means that they're pushing it to 105 watts, if that means pushing it to 105 watts, that means they're just trying to eke out as much performance out of this thing as they can. Now, I mean, I really hope we still see like, I don't know, a 10 or 15 watt version of it, or whatever they call their Z. What would it be?
28 watt like this.
Yeah.
The Minis Forum V3.
Or hopefully we just see it repackaged in like what their Z3 or line or whatever it would be. I could still see this going into handhelds because this does look to me like a perfect handheld APU.
Yeah, I mean, if you really push this thing hard, again, my understanding is they're using 3 nanometer for the IO die that has the compute units. I can't imagine the yields aren't excellent or that very many of them need half of the bus and compute units disabled. So I would suspect that what would be the comparison I would make? Oh, I don't know, but like I think a good comparison was like the GTX 670, where there were models of the GTX 670 that could reach the or the 660 Ti actually. Yeah. It was the 660 Ti. There were models of the 660 Ti that Nvidia got mad at MSI about. I think it's probably a Lightning model, because the difference between the 670 and the 660 Ti, for those who don't remember, was just 192-bit instead of 256-bit bus. And I mean, at that point, when you're cutting it down that much, I mean, some of those yields for the 660 Ti could be clocked really fast. And MSI gave it ridiculously fast GDDR5 that made up for the bus width and matched the 670, and they sold it for $50 less than the 670, and Nvidia got mad at them. So I have no doubt that if you're cutting, and that I don't remember how much that was cut down, probably like 20% or something. If you're cutting this down, or maybe less than that, but if you're cutting this down by 50%, I imagine these things are probably going to be able to be clocked very fast, most of them. And there's probably two 20CU models. Like this is the ones that barely work, and then this is the ones that, couldn't meet 40 compute unit, 32, maybe there'll be a 28 one or something. And they're like, so we just decided to go to 20 and clock it crazy fast. And I think you pair that with 24 gigabytes of LPDDR5X, which is what I would expect them to pair this with. And you have 8 gigabytes for the GPU, 16 gigabytes for the system. This is going to blow away any of those budget gaming laptops that I'll see PC Gamer have some headline. This Nvidia RTX laptop is $500 off, and I'd buy one if I were you. That's just how they phrase these articles now. And it's like, oh, wow, it's $800. It used to be this much. And then you're like, it's a 4 gigabyte graphics card that's RTX and, only has 12 or 16 gigabytes of RAM. I think this could eat those alive if they were priced near the same because of the VRAM issue alone. And again, it's 20 compute units, but it's going to have substantially more bandwidth still if it has Infinity Cache than Strix Point. And I actually have a Strix Point system next to me right now. And in my testing, it's in some games a lot weaker than the 3050. But I was comparing it to the 3050 desktop, actually. But in some games, it almost died it. And that's the 3050 desktop. So I'd say, it's like 30% weaker than the 3050 desktop once you give it enough power. This is a 54, I think I pushed it to 65 watt APU here next to me at Strix. All right, so add 25% more compute units and Infinity Cache and now clock it even faster. I have no doubt it'll be competing with 3050s, and very easily. And honestly, it could probably compete with 3060 max Qs. I don't know how low the clocks go on the 3060, but I could, probably not 4060s, but I could see if there's 45 watt 3060s or whatever it goes down to. Yeah, I could see this probably even competing with those. And that just eliminates the budget Ampere crap that NVIDIA wants to sell for 2 years, assuming they have the volume for it.
Oh, yeah. Thinking about this, could really be overclocking the hell out of this thing. So, I don't know. I could easily
3 gigahertz 20 compute units. Take the 6500 XT, add 25% more compute units, and then clock it faster and add 10-20% IPC. Yeah, you're getting to 3050 desktop potentially if they really push it very hard. Although they keep comparing it to mobile 3050, but maybe that means beating mobile 3050.
Well, they're looking for a favorable comparison, and the comparisons they can make are 3050 or 3060. Unless they're outright beating the 3060, I don't know why they wouldn't compare it to the 3050.
Well, and to be fair, I don't know how many 3060s are still sold. They still sell tons of 3050s, and it seems like the lineup is just 4070, 60, 3050. Then there's a 4050 6 gigabyte, and then there's the 3050 6 gigabyte. It seems like that's it. The 3060 is just gone. But all right, let us move on to another exciting, although far, far more exciting, probably the most exciting thing we have to discuss here in this episode of Broken Silicon with story number 5. Zen 6 Medusa Point and Ridge specs leaked. All right, first quoting from Fudzilla and then moving on to some editorialization. All right, Fudzilla. The dark satanic rumor mill has manufactured a hell-on-earth leak that has Zen 6 Medusa Ridge processors featuring 12-core complex dies. According to Moore's Law is Dead, the leak suggests that Medusa will have AMD's typical dual CCD setup, and the new Ryzen 9 series could have 24 cores. If it all pans out, then this design will mean an improvement in processing power, especially for applications that use multiple threads and high-performance computing tasks. The new CCD design will not only be used in desktop processors, but also in AMD's next-generation EPYC server processors known as Venice, as well as the Medusa Point and Medusa Halo mobile processors. Indeed, the excellent information we received from a trusted, verified, and long-running proven source confirms, and I showed it to you before we started recording, Dan.
Yeah.
I have diagrams of Medusa Point and Venice. The Venice one looks almost exactly like my previous one. And Medusa Point, you would agree, it's unmistakable. There is a fabric there to a CCD, and you can count them 12 cores, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely.
And you can count what looks like 8 work groups as well. So anyways, moving on here, just fully resummarizing again. Medusa is a full system of chiplets, it seems, extending EPYC and Ryzen commonality to laptop this time, not just doing monolithic dies there. All markets will share this 12-core CCD, the most complex die now with 12 Zen 6 cores that is likely, based on napkin math we did on die size from what we saw, because we know the die size as well, 75 millimeters squared, likely on some form of TSMC 3 nanometer, with there then being a Zen 6C die for server that seems, based on napkin math, to be on 2 nanometer. By the way, with a 175 millimeter squared CCD, massive 32 core CCD for server. That then means if we have Medusa Point with a 12 core CCD, certainly 24 core Ryzen 10,000 should happen on AM5. Although the differentiating factor will really just be the IO die. An IO die, which was around 200 millimeters squared for Medusa Point, making the total die size actually for the Point this time being, I think, the largest they've ever done for an APU. Around, what would that make it then? 275 millimeters squared, about 20% bigger than Strix. And then another IO die, probably 300 millimeters squared or larger for Medusa Halo, I would assume, with, I don't know, 40 to 80 compute units. And then probably a smaller, like 100 to 150 millimeter squared IO die for Medusa Ridge that can then interface with 2 CCDs. Let me see here. I guess, the only other thing to say, I think I already said, though, is Venice. The previous leak I had is 4 IO dies stitched together with 8 32-core CCDs. The diagram I just saw had 2 IO dies, which I don't know why they would need more than that. They probably just found less chiplets is more for performance, so they're just going to use 2 IO dies for Venice, 1 IO die probably for Threadripper and whatever follows after Sienna, with up to 128 cores, and then 1 and then 2 for going up to 256 cores. And then these chiplets are also connected with advanced packaging. There's an organic interposer that then has a silicon bridge put on top of that is then put under the CCD and CCX and IO die, and that's also the same thing they're using for Venice. So you use 1 for Medusa Point, by the way. So 1 silicon bridge with the organic interposer for the IO die to the CCD, and then for Venice, there's 9 of those below it. So just to make that clear to everybody, and I'm getting more information about it too, so I should have updates to this very soon. But until then, Dan, what did you think about this leak?
I mean, it's very exciting for you're finally getting the AMD promise of more cores, Tom. Well, EPYC's been getting more cores for a while, but us hungry gamers haven't gotten more cores in a while. And I mean, overall, I do think just the change in design is interesting, where they seem to be completely moving away from monolithic designs, which allows them, like how you highlighted in your video, allows them to continue working with a limited number of dies. It's just the philosophy seems to just be getting turned a little bit, where it's more about the the IO die and CCDs now, rather than tile-based versus monolithic designs.
And I think I should remind everybody, I believe this was in my Medusa leak. I want to say half a year ago, I confirmed that Strix was originally supposed to be all 3 nanometer, all chiplet. Like that Zen 5 was supposed to have 3 nanometer CCDs for consumer and have them with a 3 nanometer IO die for Strix Point, but they had the delays with the 3 nanometer with TSMC. And then they also had just tons of issues getting the performance where they wanted it to be. And so they just said, nope, 4 nanometer. for Granite Ridge for Zen 5 desktop, 4 nanometer for Strix Point. It's going to be monolithic. We're not wasting our time here. I mean, they were even throwing around the idea of just using Zen 4 chiplets with it because of how many issues they were having with the 3 nanometer Zen 5. So they're like, that'd be stupid. And then they still decided to go chiplets for Strix Halo, and that's why it's coming out a year late. But it seems like, and you know, maybe they also did that because they're like, well, we need to figure out this eventually. But we need Strix out now. We want Zen 5 out for the holiday season. So we need to, as a opportunity to learn how to do this in the first place, make Strix Halo work, and it sounds like they have. And so, yeah, I don't know, probably in about a year to a year and a half, we're going to have 12 core APUs that use chiplets that are shared and binned from the same chiplets on desktop and probably on Threadripper and on some server products. And I think for me, we have to bring this up. The thing I'm probably most excited about, or one thing that I think needs to be highlighted because people might miss what this means, if they're going with 12 core chiplets, that means they can have a 12 core unified CCX with Vcache on it in the mid range. And that's going to just be, again, another massive uplift, I think, to gaming performance, because I think you already see games using more than 16 threads occasionally, though they don't really need it. I think by the time this launches, you're going to have a healthy amount of games that can really benefit from having 12 cores when the cores don't need to go to another CCD and there's a latency penalty. And then imagine just all of those unified with Vcache. Don't know how Panther Lake's competing with that, but I guess that's what's happening. But I don't know. Do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I don't think so.
Techno writes in and says, do the 12-core Medusa chiplets mean that we'll see 12-core Ryzen 7s or that we'll see more Ryzen 9s in the top end, i.e. will we see a 12-core 9900X, 16-core 9930, 20-core 9950? Well, how would let's remove what the naming will be first. How would I do this? This is going to be on a matured 3 nanometer, so I think yields will be very good. I think that what you would I think for sure they'd want to move 8 cores down a little bit in the stack if they can. But for the most part, and it is what it is. Look, Arrow Lake has shit the bed. And at best, this will be competing with Panther Lake. At best for Intel. Intel will have Panther Lake ready to fight this for like a year before I think Nova Lake launches. Even if it got delayed half a year at least of AMD just being out there before Nova Lake's out. And again, Arrow Lake's what, like 30% behind the 9800X 3D in gaming. Okay, so let's assume Panther Lake clings back 10%, even 15. All right, now it's 15% Gulf. Zen 6 with 12 cores unified with Vcache is probably going to add another 15% at least in gaming, I'd guess. At least 10, let's say. So you're at 25%. Do I believe Nova Lake's going to have a 25 or 30% gaming uplift over Panther Lake? I don't. I think it's more like 20. Hopefully it has it. And, I know they're going to get ELLC. That's their version of Vcache, apparently. That's exclusively leaked a very long time ago by this channel. I think over a year ago. So maybe there's some hope there, but I don't really see why outside of the low end, AMD's going to be forced to do anything but at the top go, nope, we have the 10950X for 600 and boop, 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 boop. Up here, we have the 10960 and then the 10970X or 10960X for $1,000. The only thing I don't know is like yields. So it wouldn't surprise me if like the 10950X had 20 cores, but if it does, I think they're going to $700 with that, Bubs. And then I think if they go then down to like 2 8-core CCDs, which I don't know how many would even need to be disabled to that. Yeah, I mean, actually, yeah, I don't know. They might just give 20 cores to the. I would wonder if they would just give 20 cores to the 10950X and just use one CCD for the 10900X and keep it $500 or something. And then again, 24 core over here for like $900. That's what I would suspect, because I don't think they're going to really have any competition. I don't know what you think.
The hopeful thing is that they kind of do it the same way they do it now. And it's like the 10950 is 24 cores, then the 900 is, I don't know, either 20 or 16 cores. And then go down to like the 800, you get 12 cores. And then I don't know, the one, hopefully the new R5 is like 8 cores instead. But they're really not in a position where they truly need to do that. And I could just see them doing like the 20 and 24 core dual CCD CPUs as like almost a pseudo HEDT thing if they get enough IO with it. But the only thing that would make me think they wouldn't want to do that is just, I mean, keep it simple, stupid. It would be good if they could continue having the same lineup or a similar lineup that they do right now. But, you know, if whatever motherboards come out with it are good enough, this could just be another way that Threadripper seems to be getting a little obsolete, and they just sell that 20 core for like 800 and the 24 core for 900 or 1,000 or something.
Yeah. And again, I think we got to consider how many yields. I mean, when we talk about a 6-core, how many 6-core yields are they really going to have of this? Maybe some. So there will be some like 10500X for like 250. But my suspicion is that they will go like, because again, remember, even going to 8-core yields, got a
30% cut down, right?
33. You're cutting down a third of this on 3 nanometer, and it's a 75 millimeter square die. I don't think there's a lot of those. Yeah. So I think at a minimum, they'll probably make the 10600X be 8 cores, the 10700X, be 10 core. Yep, I think I figured it out. 10600X, 8 cores, probably for $300. 10700X, 10 cores, probably for $400. And then I think they will do they'll probably do like a 10 core. I don't know. We'll have to see what they would decide to do, but I could see a 10 core 10800X 3D. Yeah, that's what I would suspect, for like 500 or something. And then for 600, a 10900X 3D. And X maybe there somewhere too, where it's just one 12-core CCD, boom. Oh. And then above that, I think you go to the 20-core, because I don't know why you'd use 2 8-cores up when you can just spit those out in the low end or something. Unless they can do like 8 plus 10, 18-core or something weird like that. Who knows? Or 2 9. I don't think so, though. You know, and then, I think they'll just go to like a 20-core. And then I think they will add the 10600X, which will be all 24 cores for probably $899. That would be my suspicion, is how they would decide to do it. Because I don't know why they wouldn't. And I just think they know that the only places they're really weak is it's getting a bit long in the tooth to only have 6 cores below 300 and to have only 8 cores below 400. Going to 10 would be more than enough, especially when Intel doesn't have hyper-threading anymore. I think that'll be more than enough to compete. And I think just the amount of yields they could have of 10-core X3D for a 10900X 3D, I think that's what you would do with Vcache. And then if you want the 12 cores with Vcache, look, man, $600 now. I mean, that's what they're probably going to do.
Yeah, especially because the 10900X 3D. I would be very curious because there are so many damn permutations of dual and single CCD models they could put out. I'd be very curious to see how much better like a 10-core X3D versus a 12-core X3D performs, because those 4 extra threads you're getting versus the 8-core models, that could really offset all of the issues you have when it starts to push 16 threads every once in a while.
This piece of content is brought to you by the Minis Forum V3. The Minis Forum V3 is a reasonably priced alternative to a sort of form factor that usually costs twice as much, and yet despite costing under $1,000, it comes with a lot of unique features. It can work as its own independent display to be used with game consoles or really another PC if you want to use it for that, and that display also is high refresh rate and is 1600p. The thing has hawk point. I mean, I actually did a full review for this. It works fantastically. Can play any AAA game that I own. And then, when it comes to battery life, it's, a bit middle of the road. But the fact is, it can use just about anything to charge. A lot of laptops that I've come across require, 45 watt minimum power sources to charge. This thing's minimum is 15 watts. You can plug it into a random port at the airport and just keep on gaming or keep working. And I have been using it diligently throughout 2024 as I've flown a lot, and it actually fits on the plane, can keep going forever with battery packs, and I've gotten a lot of work done on the go. And then when I get back to the hotel room, I start to play because, again, it has gaming chops. So if you're interested in this product, go to the link in the description and use offer code BrokenSilicon to save $30 on this fantastic laptop, tablet, display hybrid device. If you use Broken Silicon, you'll be helping the channel. Even just clicking on the link helps as well. So support Moore's Law is Dead by checking out the Minis Forum V3 today. All right, Glass writes in and says, with the 9800X3D likely being the best gaming or general use CPU for at least 12 to 18 months, why would AMD even bother releasing Zen 6 out prior to 2027? A Zen 5 Plus refresh for a new I/O die to include CUDA support seems like a good alternative in later 2025 to 2026. Well, first of all, again, I think if there's a Zen 5 Plus, it's going to be because Zen 6 is delayed to mid to late 2026. That is why you would do that. And I think there's room. New I/O die. They're still using the I/O die from Zen 4. It seems to be holding it back. Do a new I/O die. Put Vcache on most of the lineup. Clock everything another 200 megahertz faster. I think that gets you a 10% uplift and the keep pace with Panther Lake. So I think that's what you do if Zen 6 is delayed. But otherwise, guys, you got to think big picture here. They're going to be competing with NVIDIA laptops. They're going to want Zen 6 laptops out to compete with NVIDIA's laptops as soon as possible. Again, if that's early 2026, that's too bad. I heard they were trying to launch it next year, but that's not because they want to launch after NVIDIA's next APU, I don't think. So yeah, and you know, they're going to be competing in server. So if you're going to launch all of this server and laptop stuff because NVIDIA, Qualcomm, Intel is still trying, and server, you want to take that server market share while Intel's way behind. You're going to have all of these yields you got to put somewhere. Desktop. So no, I think it is funny to think though, because it's in laptop, they would have more flexibility. They wouldn't need to launch desktop right away, but I'm sorry, I think they would want to, especially because you don't know what if Panther Lake's 20% better. Like you want to keep that lead, and Nova Lake will have ELLC, their Vcache competitor, and I hear it is a larger IPC uplift than what we've seen out of Intel recently. It's Intel. Could end up like crap. Who knows? But if you're AMD and you know Intel's going to have their biggest uplift in generations with Nova Lake with their own Vcache variant on it, don't you want to launch a year before that? I think you do. So again, I'm not saying there won't be a Zen 5 Plus. I think the idea of a Zen 5 Plus mid to late next year is interesting, but that's going to be because they need a stopgap, not because they're like, we just decided not to compete with Diamond Rapids and NVIDIA's APU and Qualcomm's next gen, and like we don't want laptop market share.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think of like a reason why they why they wouldn't release Zen 6 if it's ready. There's just no like economic reason that makes sense to me, unless like Zen 6 for some reason is way more expensive than Zen 5 is to manufacture. So just the concept doesn't make sense to me, where it's like, well, we need to make sure we're not beating Intel too hard. Like this isn't like children's community sports where you can't win by more than 7 points or something. Yeah.
AI Soldier 789 writes in and says, good day to you too. As the 9800X3D has shown, Zen 5 on Ryzen 9000 is heavily restricted by its I/O die. Likely, yeah. Would a switch to TSMC 5 nanometer be enough to fix that problem for Zen 5 Plus? Or is TSMC 3 nanometer like was originally planned? I think it was originally planned for Strix. I actually don't know if they always planned that for the desktop variant. But is that what they should do for Zen 5 Plus? I think it can't just be a die shrink. It's just going to have to be a complete redesign. And I would suspect it could be 3 nanometer. I mean, Strix Halo uses that. I would suspect it's 4 or 3 nanometer to be in line with some variant of a memory bus they did for the other ones. And again, why would you do this? Well, you could get a better memory controller with faster RAM that is lower latency, that just scales bandwidth better for Zen 5. But on top of that, you could also update to RDNA 3.5 in the I/O die, have better output. That's not a big deal. Maybe even can put a little NPU in there or something. So you're like, oh, see, Arrow Lake isn't the only one. They have 16 tops. We have 30, or I don't know what the heck they would do for that NPU. But I think they might as well just go to 50, honestly. But I mean, so they're Copilot plus certified. But so I think that's the type of stuff you would do. And I think it's less important, like which node exactly they would need to get there. I don't think it's the nodes that important. As long as they even went to 5 nanometer, I think they have way more than enough of what they need. It's just like which I/O dies that they've already designed are they going to base this on, right? If that makes sense. Aluvaiti writes in and says, Apple M4 delivered a 25% performance increase over the M3 and beats everything in single-threaded performance all around. Has AMD got a chance to get close to that with Zen 6? I'd have to check. It really depends on the benchmark. Again, in synthetics, Apple just dominates. But I think, and Carbon Cry put a note on this too, guys, it's not apples to apples. Like Apple has their own garden perfectly programmed to the metal for their CPUs. And they don't have Windows bloat. I mean, we've even seen many times in the past, like Cinebench scores. I don't know if that's true anymore, but at least when Threadripper first came out, just we're better on Linux than Windows by like a huge margin. And so I don't think it's quite apples to apples, but like can Zen 6 that I think is like Strix is like 20% behind, I want to say, the M4 in single threading. Don't get mad at me if it's 40%. I off the top of my head, I thought it was like 20. Or 10 to 20 or something. Can they close that gap? Yeah. Will they do that before the M5 comes out? I don't know. But I think they're honestly in CPU close enough right now for most. Like I have a Strix system here next to me. It is the snappiest system I've ever used. It's actually crazy how snappy it is. So I think in actual user experience, I don't think AMD is going, God, we got to beat Apple by 5% in single threading. I don't think that's what's going to make someone choose an AMD laptop over a MacBook.
I mean, I don't know. I think the M5 is probably going to be coming out at around the same time, maybe beating Zen 6 by a little bit. So what we're really asking is, will it beat the M5? Which, who knows? And it doesn't matter. I don't.
Yeah, let's see what Strix Halo does too. Like to have a real comparison here. That's gonna be more analogous to even Medusa Point, I think, in performance. All right, moving on to our final story here with story number 6. Qualcomm not interested in Intel anymore amongst CHIPS Act cuts. So quoting here from TrendForce first, but there's actually quite a bit to get through. Last week, Qualcomm CEO Cristiano Amon said that the company plans to focus more on new markets, such as personal computers, networking, and automotive chips to generate an additional $22 billion in annual revenue by fiscal 2029. Interestingly enough, he also told Bloomberg TV that at this time, Qualcomm has not identified any large acquisitions it necessarily needs to achieve this goal. So continuing here, Tom's Hardware says the U.S. government is scaling down Intel's proposed $8.5 billion federal chips grant to less than $8 billion, partly due to a $3.5 billion contract Intel secured to produce chips for the Pentagon. But the Commerce Department has expressed concerns about Intel's ability to attract sufficient demand as well for chips produced in the United States. To address this, the Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo has engaged companies like Apple, Google, and Microsoft to encourage their purchase of chips made in the U.S. Great. Also, Intel's recent struggles have raised concerns about its ability to meet the funding benchmarks sent by the U.S. Commerce Department. So yeah, Intel's woes continue as one of the early sharks that this channel talked about that might take a bite out of Intel has seemed to investigate acquiring them has been put off. Qualcomm has reportedly backed off buying Intel, likely seeing it as expensive and a risky proposition, with the fabs being an expensive poison pill that no one wants to use. You see, fabs are expensive, and Intel's foundry effort is not revenue positive yet. Global Foundries owners spent billions of dollars, for example, before Global Foundries became self-sufficient on its own. And Global Foundries is a much smaller and cheaper to run operation and easier to turn on as a real foundry than what you get with Intel. So probably only Samsung really sees Intel's fabs as positive for them. That said, Qualcomm seems still interested in some parts of Intel. And the portioning of the turkey, they're probably looking especially at Mobileye to bolster their strong car silicon segment. Issue with such portioning in the U.S. subsidiaries also prohibits independent sale of fabs. Independent Intel is required to have 50.1% stake in their fab. So even the U.S. government is growing impatient and worried, it seems. Intel's chip subsidiary was reportedly cut significantly due to Intel's Pentagon contract. Note that the chip subsidy is not all cash and is not enough to build the project by itself. Again, this is something like you see with like what funding to Ukraine or something too. Everyone just thinks it's all just like there's a monopoly guy that hands over billions. Like, no, it's like that's how they say what it's worth. It's actually much more complex than that, what's given to Intel. With Intel struggling for cash, this could be a serious issue for their planned massive build-out, especially the megalomaniacal Ohio project. At the same time, the government is taking it upon itself to help Intel get customers for made in the USA chips. Is there anything more humiliating for a once proud national champion like Intel? So yeah, Dan, what did you think about all this?
just more failures for, well, I don't even know, more failures for Intel at this point.
People noticing them.
Yeah, people noticing them. And I don't know. It's honestly interesting. Like, we've been discussing this for a while now. It truly seems to finally be breaking into the mainstream that Intel is actually in trouble. And I think that the whole CHIPS Act thing was a really big wake-up call for, a lot of like the more mainstream media, or I should say traditional media, reporting on it, because I think this was reported by it's getting coverage in like Reuters and all of the usual suspects. But yeah, I mean, I think it's bad for Intel. I am kind of at a point where I think Intel needs to be bought to be a viable company into the future. I don't know if you agree with me on that, but
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping to have Daniel Nenny on in a week to talk about this. We'll see if that turns out. I know he's a really busy guy right now, but at least we're trying to set that up. And I also talked about that with like James and some other people. And a lot of these industry veterans I speak with are just openly going, oh no, Intel needs to be bought or merged. And I got to say, like, I hope this doesn't come off the wrong way, but I see some comments still to this day of people going, Intel will be fine. They still got all this money, or Intel's doing great. Just stop being a hater. And I have to say to those people, where the fuck have you been? Like, Intel is in mainstream and traditional news. This isn't DigiTimes reporting about an issue. This is Reuters. Like, we spoke to 40 people at Intel. They fucked. And if you haven't noticed that, like, I don't know what rock you're under. Intel really is doing this bad. The U.S. government has now definitely noticed, and they're like, oof, we don't know if we want to give them that much money because we don't know if they can actually do anything with it. And I'm sorry, this was a Tom was right moment. I said this at least a year ago. Some could argue since 2019, but in the specifics that I would claim to be definitely right about a year ago, it's like, guys, just show me where the money is. Show me how they're going to get through this. Show me why the U.S. government would just be like, here's the money. Who cares who has it? Like, I don't know what the perception is, because a lot of these comments, it comes from people both within the U.S. and outside. I actually wouldn't say it's a non-U.S. centric, but I see people going just like, well, the U.S. will always bail Intel out. I've been saying it consistently. Why? The U.S. government doesn't just always bail people out. It doesn't. It does not always do that. And if they have other options, like when they bailed out the banks, for example, I don't think they felt like they had other options. But if they have other options, they're willing to give money to another company. And I don't know where this mindset came out, that like there's nothing that can stop Intel. There's always going to be something that saves them. We don't know if there will be, but something needs to be for them to continue to operate. I don't know if that's Samsung or who, but something's going to have to happen.
Well, yeah, and I was just going to say, we're already talking about, I know they haven't had these funds released to them yet, but Intel's already getting huge cash injections by the U.S. government in the form of the CHIPS Act. So, I mean, I don't want to call this a bailout because it's being done for specific reasons, but Intel is still flailing with government funding. How much funding do they need to remain viable? How much government funding do they need to remain viable? And why would you assume the government is just going to give them, like, I don't know, $80 billion or however big, like, the car bailout or car company bailout was? Like, why would you assume they would do that when they're already pulling existing funding that they want to give to Intel? Yeah. Or limiting existing funding? They're
already telegraphing that this is conditional on them delivering, right? Colt Marshmallow writes in and says, I keep seeing in the Google News feeds of the U.S. government encouraging an Intel, AMD, and Marvel merger. Does that seem reasonable? Maybe. Look, AMD and Intel, despite being strange bedfellows with how much they've competed with each other, would be very accustomed to each other bedfellows, though. I mean, sure, they've even made APUs together. There was the Vega HBM module they attached to Kaby Lake at one point, the Kaby Lake G products. So they've worked together before. They make similar products. That's a very logical merger. I just still wonder, like, that would have to be one, because I don't know how much AMD really wants Intel. That would only happen if, like, there was a condition. For sure, there would be a condition, I think, of guess who the CEO is in this new company? Lisa, baby. Too bad, Pat. AMD would definitely want that. And it would have to be pushed hard by the U.S. government, I think. But otherwise, I think it makes much more sense for a lot of other people to buy them. Or again, unfortunately, to like partition them up. I don't know who would buy their GPU division. I'm sure there's some useful IP there. Maybe Apple would. They buy that. And then the fabs, who knows who would buy them? You know, maybe the fabs would be bought also by Apple or something, but in the CPU side, they don't want it. Qualcomm buys it, or Nvidia tries to buy it. Like that's, you know, I don't think they're going to let Nvidia just buy the whole company. But he says, wouldn't it be cheaper to slap U.S. tariffs to encourage AMD to use Intel foundries? No, like it won't be, because there's TSMC in the United States. And in the wrap up that we're about to get to, they're going to okay 2 nanometer in the United States quicker than usual, like after 2025. So no, I don't think that you would be doing anything. And, you know, the tariffs didn't really help the car companies. What we had in the United States when there were tariffs on foreign cars is over time, they just became so complacent in the U.S. that even despite tariffs, foreign cars were better. And then GM and Ford had to get, and Chrysler had to get their shit together. I don't know that Chrysler ever really did, but Ford and GM mostly did. And it's like trying to prevent competition from happening. I mean, you can see it like kind of working with like food, because that's like a tomato's a tomato. But yeah. But like when it comes to complex stuff like this, it's just delaying the inevitable. And the better thing to do is to just try to get either Intel on the right foot, or get the right parts of Intel into companies that will use their IP better, so the competition stays in the U.S. Tariffs are just going to delay the inevitable, because eventually someone will just make it even like, it's like, oh, you have to use Intel. Great. Well, now I mean, what would that do to TSMC? Like, so what now? The U.S. isn't using the most competitive chips for a lot of stuff that is used in like weapons. Like, I don't see how that really helps the U.S. long term. I don't know if you want to say anything else.
No, I mean, yeah, if the tariffs end up going into effect against TSMC, there's going to be an incentive for them to manufacture on Intel, obviously. But as you said, TSMC is going to start doing, right? That's their most advanced nodes in the U.S. Or, okay. Yeah, so that is a huge change in Taiwanese policy that they're able to do that. And I don't know why AMD wouldn't just move manufacturing over to TSMC America. Although I will add that either effect will probably make, all of these effects I think will make AMD chips more expensive for the consumer. So, woo, fun.
Yeah. AI Fish AI Wrangler writes in and says, weird outside the box thought. Could Nvidia just buy an x86 license from Intel? Intel's would get an infusion of cash. Then Nvidia can make laptop APUs without worrying about having to emulate or how they'll work on Windows. It seems easier from a regulatory standpoint as well, as they aren't becoming a monopoly. They're just getting the ability to compete even more. Yeah, I think that the U.S. government would allow Nvidia to buy an x86 license. I don't think there'd be any blocking of that. I think it's very hard to not see that and go, oh, that's more competition for the American people. But would Intel sell it? I don't know. And I think I've also heard some people say that AMD may have to agree to let Intel sell it. I don't know if that's true, but I've heard that from some people, because like the contracts, technically who can have it, and we won't do anything with it unless we let you.
AMD got the x86 license through a lawsuit, right?
Yeah, and a deal with Intel where like Intel could have their 64 license or something. But yeah, anyways, I think then even if they were allowed to, like, why would Intel want to do that? Because I think that's like kind of a long-term, like that's a time bomb for Intel. Like they would only do it if they have to. And I mean, think what you're doing long-term. It's like, what? I mean, I don't know how much money Nvidia would give them. Nvidia gives them $100 billion. Whoa, we're back on track, baby. Like, we have the money. We don't have to lay anyone off. We can just try to take 5 years to catch up to AMD and Nvidia again. And that means in 5 years, maybe 3, you've caught up to them. But now Nvidia has more money than you still and is shooting out x86 CPUs. So I wouldn't say never to that, but I just find it unlikely, because if Intel does that, they would have to be crazy desperate, because they would be admitting they're never going to catch up to Nvidia ever again. And I don't know that they ever will, but you'd have to be admitting to yourself you're getting rid of like the thing that is always going to be a silver bullet for you to like be worth something. And now you don't have that. You're basically saying, we know Nvidia is going to run away with this, but we just want to survive.
Also, how many licenses do they have to give? Because I'm actually not sure.
They have enough.
They have enough? Okay.
Yeah, they have enough.
I mean, I guess, yeah, they would have more, Nvidia would have more money than God in like 5 years if they got an x86 license. And I don't know. I think that would just end up Intel being further screwed in like 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Jensen Wang, not anti-competitive, writes in again and says, okay, here we go. I think that Global Foundries and Intel is who should merge, forming the Foundry Company, owned no more than 20% by the UAE, and then Apple and Nvidia should split up Intel, CCG, and Server Group, and then Mobileye and Altera become independent with options for many tech companies given the option to invest in them with a 10% ownership each. Art goes to Moore's Threads or Samsung then. But yeah, so Carbon Cry said that this would be very unlikely because of the U.S. government requirements for Intel foundries. But let us move on. But I will echo your sentiment here. Again, I think that were Intel to be broke, is there a merger or buy? I think it would probably need to be multiple companies buy parts of Intel for it to make the most sense. Okay, so now let us move on to the wrap up. These are the final stories that we thought needed to be mentioned, but not necessarily needed their own story. The first one is TSMC allows for 2 nanometer manufacturing in the US after 2025. That's a huge deal. We had to get to that. Also, there's been reporting that Qualcomm allegedly has sold only 720,000 X Elite laptops. As crazy as that sounds, I actually could believe that. I mean, I believe I was told something like 2 to 5 million total X Elites were manufactured, and they were expected to just have that one run of chips last to like the middle of 2025 or after. So I don't think it's selling well, and you're telling me they've sold through a fifth or a fourth of that or something? Yeah, I actually could believe that's all it is. Samsung's first to gate all-around transistors and a tiny die for a smartwatch. Yep, you know, Samsung, you're first to everything on paper. We'll see if it actually works. Same thing. They just announced 42.5 gigabit per second GDDR7. For those keeping track, that's effectively double GDDR6X. So you could have a 256-bit bus. Yeah, I mean, you could have a 192-bit bus with the same bandwidth as a 4090. The MI300C is used by Microsoft Azure. They got 88 Zen 4 cores with HBM. Okay, so Microsoft's buying MI300. Sony, this was a funny one, Dan. Sony updated their PS2 total sales to 160 million so they can still say they have the best-selling console. For now.
That's weird. Where did those additional sales come
I think
from?
Sony said over the past 10 years they sold another 5 million.
Good for them, I guess. I don't know where. I would have thought stock would have completely dried up for those a while ago, but
So we're 20 years old.
yeah. But good job, Sony. You did it.
Thought that was a funny thing to mention there. Bloomberg confirmed the Moore's Law is dead PlayStation handheld leak. And I think I mentioned this earlier in the show. I just went on Sacred Symbols Plus with Colin Moriarty. That's supposed to come out after Thanksgiving, so probably right around this. So if you're fans of him, check that out as well. And in that, I pointed out, look, I leaked that there are multiple options for the handheld. Maybe they're like, they could go with the PS4 option, they could go with the PS5 option, or they could go PS6. And I said the PS4 option only makes sense if it launches like right now, or honestly a year ago, because I think the PS5 will be around a long time, so I could see the PS5 argument. But like, what? Add $100 to the total cost of the PS handheld to make it PS5 compatible, so that you can sell it for 5 years running all games. Because I do think the PS5 might become a budget it's not a PS6, but like they're going to keep selling that under the PS6 probably. But we'll see though. If they make some budget version of the PS6, maybe they won't. Maybe they'll just drop it. Hopefully. But the one thing I also noted is they didn't go into much details, and hear me out. And again, I'm not saying I know this. I just suspect this. I continue to believe, Bloomberg reported that according to their sources, this is a few years away. So we're talking 2027. So they're going to launch a PlayStation 5 handheld next to the PS6. I just find that hard to believe unless they're also using that APU to make some $200 Series S-like console or something for dual use. But I'm sorry, if you're launching this next to the PS6, God, if we think the PS5 is going to be around for another 5 to 10 years with a lot of games still supporting it, how long will the PS6 be around?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, if this is coming out in 3 years, I maintain this APU should be used for the S version of the PS6. I really, really think it should be. And a lot of these, I don't think it was Bloomberg. I think it might have been Bloomberg or Washington Post reported that like the Switch 2 was launching a year ago because they saw the Switch OLED. Mm-hmm. No offense. A lot of times these reporters are not as up on the technical details. They'll just hear something like it's going to run PS5 games and they think it's a PS5. I would not rule out that they're working on a PS6 handheld. But I don't know, though. I could see it going either way. It's just it's not like they said this will not run PS6. They just said it should run PS5 games. You know, it also should run PS5 games, the PS6. Right. So, and also I don't have much to add to this one, but the 4090 Ti was found in a trash can. Did you see that, Dan?
Yep.
Any thoughts on, I mean, I almost said something, but I don't want to give away how I got access to some information, but I will say I am aware that some of these companies just have piles of prototypes in a trash can outside their building sometimes, and sometimes people get a hold of them.
You know, one time I found like a motherboard in a dumpster, and that was a pretty exciting day for me. Can't imagine finding an unreleased 4090 Ti just sitting in a dumpster. I'd be very excited.
You know, there is one that I think I can say, because this was a couple years ago, I believe, and I'm not going to say which company it was, but it's one of my sources, and it wasn't like Nvidia, AMD, Intel, so I can tell you that much. It was another company that would have a reason to have a lot of Nvidia graphics cards. They were upgrading the stuff that their production people use. And the person told me that there was a garbage can full of Quadros and Titan RTXs. And the person, you know, not everyone's as technical. They don't follow the news as closely. It's like this 24 gigabyte Titan RTX. I think this was 3. It was before Lovelace was out. It was like, or I think it was right after Lovelace was out. It was like, is this 24? No, it was right before Lovelace. Yeah. Was this 24 gigabyte Titan RTX still good? I'm like, give it 24 gigabyte 3070 Ti probably, because it actually is more enabled than the 2080 Ti was. I'm like, so yeah, if that still works, sure, that will be a great card for 5 years still. And there were 48 gigabyte Quadros. And the person was like, so we can just take these? And they're like, it's in the trash at the company. So people were like, there's like a mad dash of people to this trash can. And they were just walking home with piles of golden NVIDIA graphics cards. You know, half of them had issues. Half of them had like artifacting because of RAM problems. But you could probably replace the RAM chips. And some of them, they just got a free Titan RTX. And I was like, is there anything I can do to get that from you? Because that was before I had a 4090 or I believe a 3090 as well. And I was like, yeah, I'll just go from a 3070 to this. That'd be fun. But yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. That's just a funny anecdote. Okay, let us now get to the final reader mails. Carmen Grind writes in, Tom, it is time to dismiss all the questions about when the Switch 2 is going to launch because it's out. This September, Mercedes-Benz expanded and enhanced their Drive Pilot to level 3 autonomous driving, and their platform runs on Nvidia Orin, the base for Switch 2. As a car, I assume this means the stealth launch of the Switch 2 comes with a Mario Kart as a launch title. Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's how funny it is that the Switch 2 isn't out when I was told it was supposed to launch early last year. I mean, or I first actually leaked details 21. So yeah, I think early to late 23 is what the plan is, what the people at Nvidia thought the plan would be. And Nvidia, Nintendo was just like, we don't really follow some things of common sense. So we're just going to keep selling the Switch because it's selling well. And I guess we'll see. It's just so silly. If that were to launch like a year after the Steam Deck, it would have made waves. And I think it still will. It's just, what an opportunity lost to not be the best gaming handheld, because it might have been for a bit if it was out before Phoenix or Hawkpoint or something.
I was just going to say, Tom, but do you think this opens the door to the most necessary brand collaboration of all time? Mercedes running Mario Party? I'm excited for that future.
Is Mario Kart really the prestige that Mercedes-Benz is? I don't know. By the way, me and Dan always go Mercedes-Benz because when we were kids in Central Illinois, there was a Mercedes-Benz commercial that always went Mercedes-Benz. It was just this old, rich-looking guy. Oh.
Well, Mercedes are very fancy. I don't know. I guess it's more for kids.
A Gran Turismo with that or something. I don't know.
I mean, it's one of those luxury cars, which those don't come.
Put something mean about like if I could see like a Mario Kart person getting a Mercedes-Benz, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, people.
I'm sure someone does in the comments here.
People that buy those luxury cars, those cars don't come equipped with turn signals, so I think it's a great. I think it's a great car. Oh, that is more BMW to B4. That's more fair, but I don't know.
Florida Man writes in, says, I propose Nvidia, once they run out of numbers on RTX or whatever they feel like, rename their consumer GPU lineup to PTX for path tracing. I don't think that sounds as cool.
Agree. GTX and RTX, I think they both work. PTX, I don't.
PTXD. Oh, that would be a meme. I got PTXD from these new PTX prices.
I don't know. It sounds like it's a model of an Acura model or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think so. And certainly, Nvidia wants to be compared to brands above Acura. Ascar writes in and says, there's a rumor going on that AMD is considering going for the smartphone APU market. Yeah, I think I saw that rumor. And I've always wondered that too, with like Soundwave, if they would try that or something. But do you have any info on that? Would it be x86 or ARM? ARM, I think. Well, I know they're working on Soundwave, so I think for sure they would use ARM. Where would they get modems for the SoC? Oh, I don't know. How would they tackle camera engines? Oh, I don't know. I'm sure they can design those themselves with what they're doing. But I would assume ARM, wouldn't you? I mean, what's the point? AMD can just design CPUs with ARM. We already know they're working on Soundwave.
I mean, yeah, I'm curious to see how Soundwave turns out. I mean, that should be... I guess I don't know if that will ever go to the consumer market, but that should be around next year, shouldn't it?
Yeah. No, I think 26 or 7, actually.
Okay.
So yeah, but again, they're working on it, and they were working on a competitor to the Switch 2 that Nvidia was working on. I assume that probably was going to use some form of ARM as well, and AMD was going to design that for Nintendo. So they've been working around ARM stuff for a while, so I think ARM. Techno writes in, being around 1 to 3 months away from 200,000 subscribers. Yeah, I'd agree, 1 to 3 months. Do you have any plans? Social Blade says 8th of February is the estimate for when you will hit 200K. Sounds pretty accurate to me, actually. No. The problem is I always work so hard, and then, I mean, you know this, Dan, we'll be preparing an episode. It's about to happen soon. Actually, would that be, so that'd be, I'm thinking to 300 episodes, that'd be 14 weeks from now. So that'd be 1, 2, 3. There's a chance it could almost coincide with the 300th episode, but half the times when this stuff happens, or 256 or 256-bit or something, like I'm preparing the notes, and 5 minutes before I start recording, I'm like, oh wait, we're at 300. I don't know. I just work so hard that I forget to savor the milestones. So I don't know what I'm going to do, but 200,000 will be a very big deal to me. I'll say that.
Yeah, I don't know. Should I send you like one of those party things like that you blow into and a little tongue thing pops out?
Just a few emojis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we'll put some emojis in the title or something. I don't know. But I think for sure you can expect a community post to tweet about it. Like, I never thought I'd get to 100,000. Now we're to 200,000. And I guess on that note, it's been a very good year for the channel. We've been doing the shorts and CDYs and, you know, making Carbon Cry and Gerard, or not making, paying them to take on at gunpoint, you know, to take on more responsibilities so that I can both have more content, but also maybe not work on it as much and try to have higher quality. It really seems to be paying off. And so I'm just glad that this year is ending on a good note, but it is not the last podcast of the year, Dan. We will, of course, have at least one more news episode, I believe. Yeah, I think at least one more news episode. And then we'll do the Christmas episode. We have David coming back on too. So make sure you're subscribed to the Moore's Law Z YouTube channel. That's going to do it for this podcast so that you don't miss that upcoming content. Also got some really exciting Zen 6 stuff still to come out as well. So definitely subscribe and ring the bell button. And then also, you know, support us on Patreon. That's the best way to support us. You know, $2 gets you access to a bunch of die shrinks. The new one just came out for Thanksgiving. We'll have more die shrinks rolling out through the end of the year. There's usually a lot of extra bonus content too for patrons while we're on Christmas breaks. You're not going to want to miss that as well. Again, just $2 gets you hundreds of extra bonus pieces of content with no ads in it, and the ability to ask us questions. And of course, higher tiers get more stuff. But I think that's going to do it for me, Dan, on this Thanksgiving, almost Christmas season episode. Any final words?
I don't think so, but I hope you guys are all recovering from your turkey comas.
I know that we barely are, hence why we are only using one mic. But thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for listening, and have a good rest of your week.
Bye.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator. Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carmen Cry and Carrie Nosugada as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About/Support page in the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie Nosugada as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong. We love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit. And give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Fools, Z Jitz, Daniel D, Deke, Nicholas Buckner, Aaron Close, Jen Rauner, Daniel High, GZ Ziggy, MJB1, SNES Chalmers, Jerem Ferrier, Valkamalev, Toka, Jensen Wang, Gregorius Asker, Sarcastro, Chris Strick, Evan Dingle, Compresse iBlocks, Trudy Espoyoid, Hal Buma, Shredbird, Owen Mobley, Sammy Malas, Jordan Simkovic, Julian Leak, The Boss Haas, Jordan Chrysantine, Franco Frederick, Jake223, Jake Martin, Zlicky, Neithra Zink, Meat and Pork, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Travis Gooding, Mad, Zutsu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Greg, Michael McGee, Patty Cakes, Gamers Unite, Amiable Chief, Mark Mitchell, Tommy, I Should, Mark Raidmaker, James Anderson, Jamie Witters, Cole Addict, Cameron, Henry Zhang, Wesley Sager, Michelle Pell, Hexapuma, Reginald Ari, Teak Autumn, Mai Sharona, Win Wang, Winstar, Corey Leonard, James I. Raider, Little Germany, JSMMH, Shay, Milton, Melodic Warrior, Brett Jones, Chuck Glidden, McDaffie, Stephen Dick, Dave Schultz, Austin Haggerty, Justin Bustle, Joe Foot, Brian Scanlon, Harlan, Jansen Aim Gima, Joseph Kelly, Slushby, Imsic Gung, Tails2299, Meal Val Verga, Sisyphos7771, The Forbidden Juice, Brian Wright, RB Racer, AC, Alex Vega, Dr. J. Mad, Freedy, Michael Cozy, John Swin, Jeffrey Gentleman, Crystal Joe, Albert Gunn, Keekum, Solarized 80, Matthew Marlowe, Brian P., Sprutnik Kudat 42, Figuk, Higuk, Cornster 671, Penta Winta, Hal Richard, Hal Angel of Cake, John Wick Boomstick, Omega Doge, Mr. Tiger, Porcelain Oats, Curry King 3, Nixus Mania, Sakosha, Armand Vakatura, State Farm Snake, Rye Hill, Chi Bowls, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.